listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. When grief first moves in, most of us go searching for the instruction manual for how to tame, manage, or really, how to get this unwelcome house guest to leave as soon as possible. After a while, though, most of us realize that grief is not really a guest. It's a new long-term housemate. And we find ways to live with grief and adapt to its sometimes very annoying housemate behavior. In May of 2023, Sweta Vikram really wanted to find an instruction manual like this. In the span of just 3 days, her father died, her father-in-law died, and it was the 9-year anniversary of her mother's death. When she went searching for information and tools on how to survive this intense grief, she came across people who said, "You'll eventually get to the other side of this intensity." But nothing and no one told her how to do that. As someone who had always turned to writing to cope, she decided to write her own instructions. She went to stay in a hotel, and in just a few days, wrote the first draft of The Loss That Binds Us, a manual of 108 practical tips to navigate and survive grief. Sweta is an international speaker, author, and Ayurvedic doctor who also teaches yoga and meditation. She's funny, radically honest, and an excellent storyteller, so be prepared for a lot of information in a short period of time. Sweta, thank you for making time to be on Grief Out Loud. I imagine we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Jana, for having me on your podcast, and a big hello and hugs to everyone who's listening in, grieving, and hopefully on the path of healing.
And you wrote a book, The Loss That Binds Us. And how did you come to write a book about loss and grief?
So last year, May 2023, we get a call let me backtrack. April 2023, my husband and I were in India. Then we get a call in May that my dad is not doing well, unexpected, that my father-in-law isn't doing well. So we catch a plane and I call it a plane. We catch a flight to India. And my dad's doctor is like, yeah, I can try to keep him alive for 3 days. I was like, what does this even mean? I was just talking to him the other day. And with my father-in-law, he'd been unwell. So in and out of hospitals, was his norm. It was never like, oh my God, we're going to lose him. And then we lost my dad. 2 days later, we lose my father-in-law. And then 1 day later was my mom's 9th death anniversary. So that last week of May felt very jarring, very heavy, didn't know how to process any of that. And then when I returned to New York, I was looking for material. I'm a writer, but also a reader and a seeker of knowledge. And, you just, at that moment, you just want to rush everything. I wanted to heal. I wanted to feel better. And I didn't know how, because dad was gone and I was very close to my father. So the person I would call and, have this banter with wasn't there. My husband had lost his father. I didn't want to burden him with my stuff. So and writing is how I've always made sense of the world, Jana. And I realized there is this heaviness to grief. Yes, we get to the other side eventually, and I hope and wish that for everyone. But in the beginning, it's dark, it's scary, and there are sides to you didn't even think existed. When people compliment a lot, people will always tell me, oh, you have this personality when you walk in and the room lights up. Oh, I was dimming out lights at that point internally. So I'm like, where is stuff on this? I'm feeling certain things, but I am being told by highlighted reels on socials and by the gurus that you'll be on the other side. But how do I get to the other side? And that's when I decided to write this book, but I didn't want it to be pedantic. I was like, when you're grieving, the last thing you want someone to say is, go to chapter 5. No, 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 simple stuff. Simple stuff based on how I made it through. And, that's a loaded thing to say made it through because grieving and healing are lifelong journeys. But, get to the side where I was able to sort of find some level of anchoring in my life.
And this all happened. Your father in law and your father both died in May. The 9-year anniversary of your mother's death is in May of
Right.
2023. When did you actually start writing the book?
I want to say maybe July because I'm grateful but also was exhausted because for the first 3 months, so I was doing a doctorate program, doing my doctorate in Ayurveda, so I also had school. So we were like, my husband and I were at work during the week, and then weekends we had house guests or people, condolence visitors. So that was going on for like 3 months. So right in the middle, I remember saying this to my husband very distinctly. I was like, can we just go away for a weekend? Because I cannot do this. I feel like we don't have any space to cope with our grief if we are still taking care of others. And in July, we went away to upstate New York, and I felt sick because I think my body was finally, let's just crash and relax. So I felt sick, and I just kept sleeping while we were there. And I think that's when the idea came to me. So they say, it's always in the rest and the pause. So and then I pitched it to one of the hotels. I was like, I need to get out of my house, but I don't want to leave my husband alone. I think we need each other at this point. So Conrad Hotel in downtown New York, they like offered me a 2 or 3 day stay, which was, I was like, because it's going to be a really horrific period. So I don't want to be away from home, but I don't want to be home. This is my sacred period. So I would write there. And I took time off from everything else. And then they have like this beautiful, I could go for a walk. If I wanted to wail, I was able to do that. That come back to the room and write. So I could just afford to be a writer. And I'm very grateful they, partnered up, offered me that opportunity because I also physically didn't have the energy to hop on a plane and go anywhere at that time. Like I'd been a caregiver for a year and a half. So I was in India every quarter, shuttling between my dad, my father-in-law, working a full-time job at night. So considering all of that, this felt like a gift.
Given what you've just told me about everything you went through in the year leading up to your father in law and your father's death, I am amazed you had any energy at all to just write a book in such a short period of time.
I've thought about that, Jana, and I realized for me to cope, writing has always been the way. For me to trying to make because it's not just that we lost our dads. My dad was also my buddy, my confidant. Like I was very close to him. So it wasn't just dealing with the permanence of his absence, but it was also acclimatizing to this world where relationships had changed. So I didn't want to burden my friends or family. And it wasn't like I didn't want to burden. I don't think people have the capacity to deal with anyone's story day after day. So I'm like, the one thing or the one activity which is a forever friend for me has been writing. So let me just pour this out. And now, when people, even last Saturday, we were at a high school graduation party, and this one lady walked up to me. She'd read the book and she said, 99% of everything that you've written, I could relate to it. 99. And she was like, I didn't have this, like to have those feelings or to have your extended family members act like beautiful people or like jokes, all of that. People you think who'll be there, your friends, oh, they disappoint you. And then out of woodworks, new people show up. And I think when you get that space, you realize everybody is dealing with their own challenges and battles of a daily basis. And some people just suck at crisis. It's they shut down. But you've never had to deal with them in a crisis mode. So I think writing this down once everything was out of my system, then it was like, okay, recalibrate. How do I recalibrate? And until I had poured this out, I couldn't pretend to be okay with the people who weren't nice. I don't have to be mean to them, but I had to name it.
I wanted to go back to your parents for a little bit since they are sort of the inspiration behind this book. And you've talked a bit about your dad and the relationship you shared, but what else do you want us to know about who your parents were and how they parented you?
Just my mom, she was more of a traditionalist. And so my brother lives in Singapore, and I visited him in May prior to all these death anniversaries. And we were talking about like how he looks like mom and is a little bit more of a traditionalist. And I look like my dad, and I'm very much like him in terms of my personality, more of a liberal, more forward thinking. I think my brother is progressive too, but like a way of thinking, my dad was also not rooted in traditions. Like it had to make sense. So for my mother, and I'm very grateful to my mom because she always said, some battles are better lost than won just because in the scheme of things. And when I was younger and hot-headed, I was like, that's such a loser thing to say. But I think in the last 10 years, I've realized not everything is worth a discussion. Not everything is worth a battle. And my dad always said that respect has to be earned. Always be a nice person. Choose kindness, but respect has to be earned. So when you think of it, contradictory statements, right? But they were both very loved for their different personalities. Mom was the types who brought people together, and cooking was a way of doing so. My cousin's wives, somebody pregnant, somebody sick, she was the healer in the family. So I get that from her. Like, food can mend brokenness. Open up your home, open up your dining table, and bring people together. And that's what we did for our 10th death anniversary last Friday. We just had a group of people, and there was food, and we talked about life, but also talked about her and joked out there some things that mom would say. Dad was also creative type, so I get my writing genes from him, social activism, social justice. So I think a lot of traits are from him, but I think mom was more grounding when I think about it. Like, she also taught me, that yes, it's good to be an individual, but like the culture that I come from, and I think she knew my personality. Like, I am a very community oriented person. So how to have those roots in, how to have that balance. So I think the contradictions in their opinions, I think, have been very anchoring for my brother and I, because we've chosen what works for us and what's true to us.
I got this image of your mom being the structure of the home, the walls and the floor and the roof, and your dad being the design elements, the photos on the
I love
wall,
that.
the rugs, the furniture, the color scheme, things like that.
I love that. And so I'll tell you, my mom wore her traditions and a sari. She was a beautiful woman, phenomenally, but she loved her single malt. Oh, you could slip in a hookah to her. My dad didn't drink. So that's what I mean by contradictions. To think this is the guy who was at all marches, fighting for women's rights, engineer by day, poet by night. There was no substance in his life, but in that terms, like alcohol, cigarettes. But my mom enjoyed her single malt. So it's in a beautiful chiffon sari sitting with a single malt. So I think she also taught me dichotomy of existence is okay. My dad taught me that professionally, like, you can be an artist, but learn to pay your bills. But my mom taught me even in your lifestyle, you could have the dichotomy. And I think so it's been very helpful that I don't label myself and I never feel the need to label anybody else. You could be 50 million people at one time, and that's super healthy to me. Like, why do we need to restrict ourselves?
One of the other dichotomies, I imagine, in your grief story is that your mom died very suddenly, very unexpectedly. No warning to that. With your dad, it was quite sudden, but there was a little bit of time of knowing that his life was going to come to an end. And I'm wondering how did those differences impact you and your grief?
So with mom, I think it was very humbling in that she was 65, 66 when we get this call. And she was headed to vacation with my dad. And the night before, obviously, there was a big dinner party at home and all of that had happened. And and we got the call, we got on a plane, but she died when brother, my husband, and I were midair. And I think there was a lot of anger. I was stuck in that anger phase. I was also 10 years younger. I practiced yoga, but like as a workout, not a mental practice. And I think her end was almost a beginning for me to survive in that, like, yoga became my way of life, studying Ayurveda, not just hearing or doing things here and there, like making it my core because that's how I felt that anger. And it also taught me life happens very suddenly and how much noise I had in my life. Being social is a very Indian thing. And my husband is Indian, but he's not. But like, I carried those traits from my parents, right? I realized how much noise I have in my life. I need to be more quality conscious of my life. I don't need to be in 50 places at one time. So I think all of that awareness started at the start when my dad was visit us, or even with my husband when they would sleep. And I kid you not, I would put my finger near the nose. Are they breathing? Because for the first 3, 4 months, I just wasn't sure. Like, I was like, people just die. I couldn't process that, and I think not being able to say a bye, I didn't have closure. Versus with my dad, it did come as a surprise to us, but we got 5 days with him. When I was going to India, and he never asked me or my brother to ever come there and be with him. And I think that's one of the reasons we would all go. My husband would go, my brother's wife would go, because that was just dad. He just knew how to love. But I realized I had also matured over the years. I'd learned my lessons. I knew how to root myself. Like, my dad was eating a certain way because I was also able to help him. So I think that's so good for your healing when there's a word in Sanskrit called seva, which is of service. So I'd been of service to my dad, and I didn't get to do that for my mom. At that point, it was very like, oh, I'm so mad at you for saying that. I never took that for granted ever again. Like, to be mad at someone, and if they mean something to me, uh, to shut down in that moment. So I think with dad, with mom also, I became like this fierce gatekeeper, protect dad, protect her memories. And it's very interesting, Jana. Like, on June 1st, I felt like this weight off my chest. I was like, that old Shweta wants to return. In these 10 years, I grew so much older. No one asked me. I think it's my type A personality of wanting to protect the people I love fiercely. So with dad, I think I got the chance to do that for him for almost 2 years. So while the loss was really, even in the last moments, we got his friends together, my brother's family, we were all there. We got his favorite food. Even if he couldn't eat, we touched a morsel to his lips. Like, my mother didn't get to eat. So I think life experiences were different. But I think with dad gone, I'm seeing the world for what it is. But with mom gone, my grief was more about protecting dad. Now it's like, no, the people who mean so much to me. And again, there is still more fluff in my life, because the people you think would be there, they surprise you by not being there. And it's also under scaling back on your own expectations, right? So there's more self growth this time. Last time there was growth to just be like that gatekeeper, I would say.
Interesting, in a way that your mother's death informed how you lived after, which then informed how you've responded to your dad's death as well, that they're interconnected in some way.
Oh, very much so. And even now that my mom-in-law's left, so I went to India in May just to see her. It was a very hard trip to, go back to that city where I would land and then take an Uber to go see my dad. I could no longer do that. But also in my mind, I know she's the only parent left. So whatever it is, until whenever I can, I'll still go see her, even if it's difficult for me. Because just reminding myself that's the one parent we have left in the family. I didn't have that maturity 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's something about death and grief that really bring our values into clear focus in a way that maybe we didn't have access to before.
I love how you say that. And I think it's also it's very ungrounding yet very anchoring, because it's almost like you're uprooted and you have to find your own roots. Now, with both the parents gone, there are no roots left. So it's also that acceptance of, I don't have an urgency to return to India. Like, I will go there because I do have friends, family, my mom-in-law, but that urgency, or just accepting, I just have one home, and that's New York. India is the land of my ancestors, but it's no longer home. And I think I've made my peace with it. So I am just back to being that Shweta version, whatever I am right now, is back to being that person who had lightness. I just don't have room for anything heavy, because I'm like, you know what, life happens like this. So you have to cherish every moment in the ways it makes sense to you on a given day.
In your book, The Loss That Binds Us, you outline 108 practical strategies to think about yourself, think about your grief, tend to your grief. And could you share a little bit about that number, 108, and how you landed on that?
So, growing up in a Hindu home, I would see my mom's mom or my dad's mom, both of them. They had like these rosary beads. We call them japa malas, and that has 108. And when, of course, when I was younger, I was like, why are you sitting with the same thing for an hour and bead after bead? But as I got older, you're supposed to do this everything you grow up with when you're younger. But I think as you get older, you see like the wisdom in everybody in your family. And I was like, it's such a progression. So it all looks the same, yet it's all different, because by the time you actually come to that 108 beat, there is a pause, there is a growth, there is a reflection, and you're not rushing through it. And then I also knew my nana, my mom's dad was also a yogi on the side. So when I was again younger, I used to tell my dad, why does he contort his body like that? Like, it looks so weird. But I also remember when my Nana died, he was taken to the hospital. He was barely there for a day and he passed away. So that stayed with me, how he was doing Hanuman asana, then taken to the hospital, then gone. So my memory of him was health, health, and health. And he would tell me about, the value of 108 in spirituality and 108 Marma points in Ayurveda, 108. Mom told me about these 108 pilgrimage sites in Hinduism. Then I started looking into other cultures because I didn't want to restrict it to Hinduism. This is much more of spirituality, less of religion. And then when I did my research, I was like, in every old world culture, 108 has a very significant value. So I'm like, this could be uniting. And also, as an artist and as a speaker who loves to chat, I was like, this will also give me a direction of stop at what something is too much, something is too little. And because these are like really small suggestions and tips, felt like 108 was a very digestible number.
So you had to give yourself an end point. Otherwise, you would have written 497 ways to tend to your grave.
100%.
I'm curious, you were finishing your PhD, right, in Ayurvedic medicine last year when your dad died. And I'm curious how your training in Ayurvedic medicine has informed or shaped or helped you better understand grief and your grief in particular.
Absolutely. So the day we did my dad's fourth rite, so it's called Chauta, which means fourth in Hindi or Sanskrit, and was the day we cremated my father-in-law. Was the day it was my mom's death anniversary. So 31st May became like this big thing for us last year. And I had to catch a flight back because I had an exam in school the weekend before. I had missed classes, and both my dad and my father-in-law had said to me they were waiting for me to become an Ayurvedic doctor. My dad, even in his last moments, was like, when he was hallucinating, and he would tell my husband, "You need to charter a plane." I was like, "What happened to you? We don't float, like roll that way." But we realized that he's like, "So I can just attend your graduation and come back." So I knew these people are gone. I've been there for the rites. I need to complete this. So the dedication was on a whole other level. I landed here. My cousin, very sweet of her, she'd been on a call in her hospital for 36 hours. She said, "No, I'm not leaving you alone." She came, picked me up, dropped me off at home. I just slept. Next day, I took the exam. So I think that journey, so it was also to keep their legacy alive. But even prior to that, with my dad especially, there's this whole concept of marma therapy in Ayurveda, which is very similar to acupressure, or energy point massages. I would give that to him to give him relief when I was in discomfort. So I was able to do that, and he recommends certain Ayurvedic herbs and medicines to him when he was unwell. Even with breath work, even with my father-in-law, I had recommended like breath work, but I have to also honor, like, my mother-in-law was there, so she had to feel okay with my recommendations. It wasn't just about me. Was that it's different with your own dad. Like, I could yell at him and ask him how to do things. So even the breath work. So what I saw was making a difference. I was like, how do I help others? And my dad was very, very proud of the fact that I was an Indian kid who had chosen to go off the bender and study these things, which most of my, and respect to each profession, are like lawyers and doctors and engineers. Here I was a writer, and then wellness educator, and then an Ayurvedic doctor, not in my 20s, in my middle age. So he really reminded me, like, age was never a factor. So I think all of that informed my Ayurvedic practice. And it became I became a serious business owner, small business owner. I was like, if I want my mother's legacy, my dad's legacy, my father-in-law's wishes to survive, I need to be better at this. So I also, while I was doing a doctorate in Ayurveda, last year in the fall, I enrolled in a business program. Our borough offers that. That was a 4 month or 5 month, I can't remember now. Thank God it feels like a blur. But it was a great program, and it also informed how I need to do this. Because you can't just help people without helping yourself. I have my bills to pay as well. And just reminding myself there's no, very often women are just expected to offer things for free. And I was of that mindset too, to quite an extent, because I had a day job and I was like, no, I've quit all of that. I'm just building my practice. So I needed to start taking myself more seriously. So I think it's not just as an Ayurvedic practitioner, but also as a business owner, my mindset transformed. post their death.
And very much in continuing on their legacy and how your dad was so
Absolutely.
supportive of you in that work.
Absolutely. In reflection, Jana, I realized like when I was 6 or 7, I have like this weird memory of my dad's uncle being unwell, and he had a heart attack then. And when he came home, my mom was the one who used to cook for him. Like she would drop off food at the hospital, bring him food, and feed him. And the doctors were so surprised that that uncle healed back, my dad's uncle, so my cousin grandfather. And I still remember, like, my mother would always say, like, spices and herbs have the power to heal. You just need to know how to do that wisely. And my entire childhood, like, she never, unless we were sick and had to be on medication, but for the most part, there was Ayurvedic, and it was just a kitchen cabinet because she wasn't a doctor, but she relied on her spice rack for so many different varieties of, you got the flu, you had a stomach upset, nausea, all of that. So I think in the last 10 years, I brought that in, but the dedication to keep the legacy alive was so much my dad. So again, it's like my mom's essence, and my dad's commitment to, this chapter of my life, which is now like, no, I want to help others. I need to help others, but I also need to keep this alive.
Of those 108 tips in your book,
Right.
which of those do you find to be the easiest for you to put into practice, and which are the hardest?
I think, for my, in Ayurveda terms, I would be termed Hypitha type A for, the non-Ayurvedic world. So anything which is routine, commitment, dedication, showing up is easy for me. I like that. So that part was, and I've had a lot of grievers tell me, like it was hard for me to not binge drink, not binge eat. I was like, for me, that was the easier part because I told myself that wasn't an option. But the hard part was forgiveness. I really struggled with it. I truly believe like I was raised to be a compassionate and kind person, and that's how my brother and I are. Inherent nature is to not hurt others. But I was just so saddened and disappointed by certain people. It wasn't like I was lashing out at them or I was violent, but I was stuck in that heavy space of darkness, and I really struggled with forgiveness. So I told myself, take your time. And one of the best suggestions I've had from a friend of mine who's actually a psychiatrist. And so it was interesting that she brought in religion into science of psychiatry and Ayurveda. She was like, and so she's Jewish. And so she was like, when you pray, do you go to the temple? I was like, yeah, for me, I love visiting any place of worship. So she's like, since you like going to the temple, when you're praying for the people who have passed away or for your friends and family, say a prayer for the people who've hurt you. So she said, instead of telling yourself, oh God, what's wrong with me? Why am I still angry at these people? Just say, pray for them. And I realized for anyone who's struggling with that, that's really lightened my load. It really has, because I started to see that's their journey, that's their struggle, and how sad to not have empathy, how sad to not have love in your heart. Like, I would never want to be that person. And I'm sorry you're going through whatever you are to be that person, because at some point you were a close association, so that means you had that love to share, and right now for whatever reason you don't have love in your heart. So may you find that, and it doesn't have to be for me because I don't want to ever trust you again, but it lightens my heart. And it's in Buddhism also, they say, right, when you're saying that loving kindness meditation that you do, you also, the people who've hurt you, you say a prayer for them. So I think it's built on that. I've found that the most difficult thing is now becoming, I need it again because my mind needs a strategy, a plan in place. Just waking up and saying, oh, I've forgiven you was not working for me. It felt very inauthentic.
So maybe the hardest aspect of grief to navigate ended up being the most powerful for you once you were able to put a
Yeah,
practice in place.
absolutely. And also, I don't think the author who coined the 5 stages of grief, she wasn't trying to tell people, she's working with cancer patients, and it was a whole separate study. But I've also learned like grieving is never linear. You can be stuck in denial, then come back to anger, then go to depression, then come. For me, I was kept going back to anger because I was like, I'm rushing myself. For me, that honesty and authenticity are so important. And here I was like trying to be that big, the one thing in every Indian home that you're always told is be the bigger person. be the bigger. So I think I was trying to keep my parents' teaching alive. And then one day I was like, oh, screw this. I cannot. Like, I have to find a strategy to be the bigger person. Otherwise, I'll be a bigger person by just, eating cheesecake or something, and I'll genuinely gain weight and become a bigger person. So, finding dark humor, but also just finding like, no, this is not working for me. Like, not everything will work. I really recommend forgiving those who have hurt us, to bring back that light within. I cannot even tell you, like, to have that light within again after a year, how transformative that feels. But I had to do the work.
So we're recording, it's early June, so it's June 7th,
Right.
2024, and you just went through that 1 year anniversary of your father-in-law's death, your father's death, your mother's death anniversary. What was the end of May like for you this year?
Awful. Uh, but I've also become very intentional to the extent possible with our lives, and of course, like talking to my husband, seeing where his comfort levels are, because I'm an external processor, he's an internal processor. So we checked with each other. Firstly, it's met with my brother's family, my husband's sister's family, and my mother-in-law. So the immediate family, that healing had already begun. And so for Memorial Day, we went away to Houston. One of my best friends, it was her son's high school graduation. My husband's cousin lives there. My parents' very close friends live there. So it was like we got a taste of our childhood. And I think for me, as an Ayurvedic doctor, that was very important. Go to those safe spaces, because the week is going to be very harsh. And I'll get to that week. And the weekend after, we did the same thing, which was last weekend. There was another cousin's, a nephew's high school graduation in the city, and then we saw some other friends. So reminding ourselves of the love that we still have. So it felt very supported. It was a good sandwich, like good crusty bread on the outside. But on my dad's death anniversary, we cooked his favorite food. My brother's family, us, my brother's, one of his daughters is in Sydney in college. So we all cooked his favorite meal, and we all went to the temple and said a prayer for him. For my father-in-law, I said to my husband, of course, we were going to do the temple, chat with my mom-in-law. She was doing a prayer at home. And I said to him, your dad for the last 3 weeks of his life was in the ICU. He didn't get to eat. So let's go out and celebrate him for the man we've known him for, not just a sick person who died. So we went and celebrated, and talked about the funny things that he would do, or the crazy things that he would do. We did that for both the dads. And then for mom's thing, again, went back to the temple. I just love going to temple or church, any place of worship that has a door open. I can just go sit there. The energy is so anchoring. And we had like a few people over for dinner, and so it was a very, very heavy week, but we were prepared for it. And I've realized in life, for most things, if you're mentally prepared, then it'll also end. If a day has come, the night will come, and next day will be different. So that's when we woke up on June 1st, and it was my nephew's high school graduation. I just felt like, and when I went, my aunt and uncle were there. They were like, "Last week was Sabines, how are you?" I said, "Today we talk of celebrations. At the end of the party, I'll talk to you about how it was and how sweet of you to think of us. But today we celebrate something good. My parents would have wanted that." So I think it takes its time, but also I had worked on my healing with my mom for 10 years, with my father and my father-in-law for the entire year, with this book talking about them. So it wasn't that one day that hit us. We knew that's a day because we lost them. Memory, science, religion, spirituality tells us, but we lost them a year ago. So that day we were like, no, it's a promise. We keep celebrating you. So I think more than the mourning, it was also celebrating. So in fact, my dad has that dark humor, and my brother and I get that from him. So I was telling my brother, title of my next book should be Memorial Day to Mourning Day, and what happens in between. So I felt like, oh, we can joke about this.
What was your dad's favorite food?
So two things. He loved to cook chicken stew with vegetables. Wherever he was, he cooked that, and a lot of pepper. And I would tell him, "Oh, dude, like he's on the pepper." That was a conversation. But I've become a vegetarian in the last year, so we didn't make that. But he loved eating khichdi, which is like a rice pilau with vegetable spices, but like a little bit more mushy. And it's Ayurveda's recommendation for every detox, like khichdi. So my dad, like my mom would get upset with him. He didn't even have the patience to warm it up. He could eat cold khichdi. So we made khichdi on my dad's thing, and my mom loved Thai green curry. It was her favorite thing. So we had that on her day. And for my father-in-law, it's interesting. My mother-in-law really loves spicy traditional Indian food, and my father-in-law was in the merchant navy. So his life was on the ship, so he was very used to. He loved Indian food, but he also loved Italian. So that was on the menu. So just even remembering, and I think it's such a good way to remember them for what they love, not the way we choose to remember what they love.
So, Sveta, one of the other questions I wanted to ask you was how you carry your parents with you day to day. And you've already illustrated so many ways that you kind of carry on their memory and their legacy. Are there any particular ways that you're envisioning for this next year of continuing to honor them and their legacy?
I love that question. And interestingly, it's by taking care of me, which I haven't. Like the last 10 years, like I said, Jan, I was like this fierce gatekeeper. I took on that role, being protective of my dad, my brother's family, my husband, all of that. And in the last year, even with my mom-in-law, like just making sure she's okay, my husband is okay, his sister is okay. Now it's I think now I feel it's my turn. And my parents would love that for love because I've always been this free-spirited, fun-loving person. But in the last 1 year, I became, and it was time with school and the debts, everything felt very intense. So like even just going back, so in Houston, when we were there for my friend's son's graduation, we were 120 of us on the dance floor, and I danced nonstop for 4.5 hours. And I was like, yeah, this is the person my parents remembered. Even with my father-in-law at weddings, like not 4.5, like he used to be my dance partner. So I'm like, just remembering pieces of me, parts of me. There are certain parts of me that never want to come back. Like I said, I became a vegetarian and I love it. It just feels right to me in the now. But there are certain parts of old me that I miss. Like I said, that lightness. So the other thing is not toxic positivity, but I have this energy where anyone who's going through a problem, they'll disappear. But when they're going through a bad phase, they'll reach out. So I'm protecting myself better. Like, yes, I am there, but I also need to be there for me. And I think in the second year, and I'm so sure my parents would love this, like Sweta taking care of Sweta. It sounds so self-fulfilling, but it's actually self-sustaining. It's my survival. And my brother and husband have talked to me about this. Like, this is who you are, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to force it. I'm returning to her. Just going out, hanging out with my friends for something random. That's always been me. And I have a partner who's very supportive of that. He doesn't need to do these random things. And I'm okay with doing that. So I think that's what it is. And I have like an altar in my little home office where I keep my parents' pictures and just continuing to, honor their presence, talk to them, talking about them, being in spaces and family get-togethers where people don't think of grief as being contagious. I don't want to be in those rooms any longer because people very often forget like grief is the one thing that doesn't discriminate. So I don't want to be in spaces where people are competing. There's a hierarchy, there's a comparison. So being more quality conscious because if I take better care of me, I show up better for others.
Well, speaking of others, for listeners who might want to connect with you and your writing and your work, where would you direct people to go?
On my website. So it's swetavikram.com, SWETA. Vikram, Vikram. Think of Bikram yoga, but with a V. Everything is on there. If you want to get in touch, to have a conversation, if you're looking for holistic ways to navigate grief or whatever, you want to read a blog post, an article, everything is on there.
Well, Sweta, thank you for being part of the show, for having this conversation with me. I feel like I've learned so much from you, and I feel very energized because you definitely have so much energy coming through, and it just feels a little bit of an honor to bear witness to the light coming back, as you talked about.
Oh, thank you. I really had a really not just great time talking to you, but your questions and the way you use words, they do something to the spirit. So, so much gratitude for the work that you are doing, Jana.
Well, thank you again, Sweta, and to our listeners, as I say it each and every single time, thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something. Please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org, and dougy.org is also our main website. You can find information about Dougy Center's programs, all of our free downloadable resources, and each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. Thanks as always to the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund for their sponsorship of this podcast. Thanks for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.